The Bari of the Nile are sedentary agro-pastoralists. They exploit the savanna lands along the River Nile and up to 40 miles east and west of the Nile. Their economy is based on subsistence mixed farming. Their domestic livestock are mainly raised for supplementing food, but mostly as a socio-economic and financial investment. Notably, livestock are exchanged as gifts in marriages and other social functions, or sacrificed in celebrations and funerals, and whenever the need arises, they are sold for cash. The Bari used to own large herds of cattle, but due to being victims of destructive slave raids which caused the spread of tsetse there are far less cattle than in the past. The Bari are consistently under pressure, now from modern urbanization annexing their green lands and infusing different cultures into their lifestyles. And historically, the Baris have been devastated by slave traders and forced by Belgians into labor camps and used as porters to carry ivory tusks to the Atlantic coast. The two Sudanese civil wars of 1955 to 1973 and 1983 to 2005 have affected the Bari social, economic, and financial dynamics. War is not an alien to Bari history. Generally, the Bari have coexisted well with the neighboring ethnic groups, but have had to pick up arms to defend their land against slave traders and plundering warriors. There is documentation of Bari resistance against invasion by Dinka, Azande, and numerous encounters with Turkish slave traders. In the past, it was a fashion among the Bari to undergo initiation ceremonies. Both boys and girls subjected themselves to removal of lower front teeth. The girls, in addition, got scarifications around the belly area, the flank, the back, and the face in the form of arrow shapes or simple flowers. Along the banks of the Nile, in the heart of the Bari land, lies the historical villages of Mongala, Lado, Gondokoro, and Rejaf. The capital city of South Sudan, the town of Juba, is also in the Bari land, situated 10 miles to the south of Gondokoro and 7 miles to the north of Rejaf. The Bari have a caste system of two groups, the Lui, or free men, and the Dupi, serfs. The Lui were the chiefs and the fathers of the soil, while the lower caste Dupi were the people captured during a war from other tribes and those who had a trade such as iron smelting, iron monging, or fishing. The Dupi were a hereditary class of serfs who had to give their services to the Lui. The Lui represented the superior cattle-owning element of Bari society. Based on Bari folklore, the history dates back to the 15th century when the Bari came from the north. Some places in the southern Dinkaland still retain Bari names, which indicate those areas were previously home to the Bari until the Dinka arrived and the Bari fled southwards. The Bari probably arrived in the current location in the 1650s or the early 18th century. Oral history recounts that they arrived in their present homeland from the north and they found a group of the Bari, and there they drove them away. Since their arrival in the new land, the Bari have been plagued by war and conflict, especially from the slave raiders and Azande. Even before the 19th century, the Arabs and Turks involved in the ivory trade raided slaves from the Bari to supply domestic needs of their home communities and to sell them in the markets of northern Sudan and beyond. The second expedition to discover the source of the White Nile entered the Bari lands on 24th January 1941. However, with the progress in the quest for knowledge came undesirable invaders in the form of European and Turkish traders looking for slaves and ivory. This was the first time Bari encountered European travelers. The Bari were lucky in this encounter, as the Turkish army assigned to protect the Nile explorers behaved unlike brutality they unleashed on the ethnic groups to the north of the Bari, Pojulu, Kakwa to the south and Kuku to the southeast. However, subsequent expeditions were different. The third expedition of 1841 to 1842 to discover the source of the White Nile also discovered that ivory was abundant in the Bari area. The rush for ivory tusk in the White Nile Valley then escalated. Initially, both European and Arab traders began sponsoring trips to Gondokoro for ivory. And for a decade, the Bari freely sold ivory tusk and other artifacts to the traders without intimidation, and no incidents of the slavery were reported by that point. In April 1854, the peaceful relationship between the traders and the Bari came to an end when the Turkish trader without provocation fired his guns into a crowd of Bari at Gondokoro. Accordingly, the Bari mounted a counter-attack that was devastating to both sides. Subsequent to this, the Bari became defensive and less friendly, and the traders resorted to violent means to procure ivory tusk, but also started taking people as slaves. Girls were raped or taken as wives by force. Some of the merchants even built fortified depots near Gondokoro where people were kept awaiting shipment down the White Nile. During this time, Chief Gubek Logore and his son Dogale Logubek of Rejaf East were killed by the Tax army. The Tax army had advanced to attack the people of Rejaf East to take the people as slaves. Chief Gubek was told of the impending attack. He advised his people to go and hide in the bushes. When the Tax army attacked at dawn, there was no one in the village except Chief Gubek and his son Dogale. The army asked Gubek as to where the people of his village were. Chief Gubek told them that he did not know. The Tax army continued upstream to the villages of Logo, Nyonki, Sindiru and Lobonok. On their way, creating havoc and raping women, killing those who resisted them and capturing others, they were told by some people that Chief Gubek had sent his people to hiding. When the Tax army returned, taking a huge number of captured people to Gondokoro to be shipped to Khartoum, they beheaded Gubek and his son Dogale. Gubek was from the Dung Kaliri clan. Diaries of European missionaries in the region indicate that in the market of Cairo, the number of slaves to be sold to Europe from the White Nile area increased from 6,000 between 1858 and 1862 to approximately 12,000 up to 15,000 per annum. These numbers reflected mostly Bari, Dinka and Mundari, but also included people of other ethnic groups neighboring the Bari and beyond, where hunting for elephant tusk was intense during that time. By 1863, when Sir Samuel White Baker arrived at Gondokoro, also on an expedition to discover the sources of the White Nile, boats of buccaneers were anchoring at Gondokoro with the sole purpose of picking up slaves to the New World. By 1865, about 3,000 slaves at any one time could be found waiting at Gondokoro to be carried down the Nile. Baker returned in 1869 with the express purpose of stamping out the slave trade. By this time, the Bari people and land were already devastated. Bari folklore tells us of how long the land flanking the Nile was full of villages spread out to the horizon as far as the eye could see. Baker concurs in his book Ismaila that this had been so when he first visited the area. However, he describes of how by the time of his next expedition, the slave traders had reduced the Bari villages to a miserable few. Neither could he obtain cooperation from the Bari, who had been persuaded by Abu Sahud, the chief slave of Agad and Company, who had a government monopoly for trade and slaving, that it was in their best interest to help the slavers and hinder Baker. The Bari were ravaged in their encounter with Baker and his team ever since then. Recovery has been difficult, considering also the fact that the civil wars in 1955 to 1973 and 1983 to 2005 have further taken their toll on the Bari. In the past, it was not uncommon for the Bari to use intermarriage from bonds between two families. Although these arrangements were sometimes made when the children were very young, the bride price was not necessarily paid until the betrothed children reached marrying age. Today, marriage among the Bari more often involves a period of courtship followed by consent of the families involved. After a period of courtship, the male suitor usually declares his intent to marry by presenting himself at the house of the girl's parents, accompanied by a few close relatives and friends. Before the wedding ceremony, the families meet in the bride's parents' house to negotiate the bride price that the bridegroom is obligated to offer. The parents of the bride and bridegroom are never directly involved in these negotiations, though they may be involved indirectly and behind the scenes. Because the Bari have long been agro-pastoralists, the bride price is traditionally paid in form of live animals. A typical bride price might be composed of 24 cattle and 40 head of the sheep and goats. When the use of the animals is too difficult, such as in the case of drought or natural disaster, bride prices in the form of cash may also be acceptable. Behaviors considered disrespectful, these can include premarital sex, eloping, and aggression towards in-laws. Once the negotiations are successful, both families bless the marriage and commence in a feast that involves drinking and dancing. After the feast, the bridegroom returns home alone, but after 2 weeks, the bride arrives to take charge of the house. For Bari who have converted to Christianity, an additional step occurs wherein the marriage also receives a church blessing. Ideally, this would occur before the husband and wife begin living together. However, because of the financial burden of having both a Bari traditional wedding feast and a Christian wedding ceremony, the trend has been to first have the traditional feast and then put off the Christian wedding for a year or longer while the couple saves up money for the occasion. This can be problematic when couples do not also wait to have children, which may be perceived as producing children out of wedlock. While the Second Vatican Council from 1962 to 1965 declaration opened the door for adaptation of some African traditional practices into the church, this has not yet led to the formation of a single wedding ceremony for Bari Christians. Many Bari combine aspects of their traditional religion with Christianity, which the majority of Bari today follow. They believe in one almighty God and existence of powerful spirits. Some still worship solely the traditional gods, one of which